We're back with our first game with the second variant of Eidolon Burn here. Take a look at the opening hand. Obviously, no lander can't keep. We will look into 6, another no lander. This hand's obviously about as good as we're going to get, so we put back that, and we're putting back Rift Bolt and hoping that our hand maximizes what it's capable of doing. It goes turn 1 Ignoble Hierarch, so most likely up against Yawgmoth here. Swinging in. Opponent plays Eldritch Evolution into Grist. We go ahead and deal with Grist here. Not always the easiest to decide what to do about Grist, but just the fact that it was such a pain. We go ahead and Searing Blaze, smack in here. Can't really continue to use too many resources on Grist, and as a result we may have used too many resources to kill our opponent at this point. It's going to be close. Opponent has a Grist ultimate lined up, and we're going to be a little bit tight on resources. I played Swift Spear here, even though it's really doing nothing. Especially with Yawgmoth, they can just kill it basically whenever they want. Opponent plays the Strangleroot Geist. They use some of the resources to put some counters on that. Also increases the amount of damage they can do to us this turn. The Eldritch Evolution, get a second Strangleroot Geist. They are trying to close out the game. So currently 4 creature cards in the graveyard, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So opponent is trying to kill us as quickly as possible. That is scary. Go ahead and hit us for a bunch here. Put us to 5. We could have waited till they ultimated the Grist, but redraw here and we just die. Notably, we die with our opponent at 3 life, so if we would have chosen to ignore the Grist, we would have done 4 more damage to our opponent. And it's possible that we would have won this game if we would have just completely ignored the Grist outside of killing the token to be able to get through for more damage. So, especially when I mulligan that low, it's a good chance that I should have just completely ignored Grist as far as killing it and just trying to get our opponent dead, especially working on limited resources as we were. As far as matchups for Eidolon, Eidolon is okay on the play, very bad on the draw. Once again, Mana Dork decks, there is some argument for keeping it in. Obviously, we boarded any type of anti-creature stuff, so Path Exile, the 1 copy of Burst Lightning, the 1 copy of Searing Blood, although once again, I don't really either support those cards that just happen to be in the lists of Eidolons that had done well recently whenever I made this video. So, going into the game, we're on the play here. 1 lander, can't really keep. This is another 1 lander. This hand's a bit risky, but I think we can keep it, especially on the play with Bolt and Ragavan. So probably put back Rift Bolt, maybe. Yeah. Play out Ragavan. Go. There goes turn 1 Yawgmoth, and just completely bricks our team here. So we have to use Path. Not that I'm happy about it, but opponent goes turn 1 Strangleroot Geist. Play that. We play these guys. Attack with everything. They block that. We bolt. We could have potentially bolted the Strangleroot Geist to keep the Ragavan around, but I think just maximizing damage was important here. As once again, we're a little bit low on resources, and our opponent has a Scavenging Ooze, which is terrifying. We have to kill the Scavenging Ooze here, or it could potentially get out of hand. Swing in. Opponent with a lot of resources against us, or good resources like Scavenging Ooze and such. They play a Yawgmoth, which just completely blanks our Swizzle Spear. Young Wolf, fetch land and pass. They swing in for 2. They go ahead and cord here for 3. Grabbing Grist. Go ahead and Skullcrack at the end of turn. Put them to 5. And go ahead and put them to 2 here. Opponent actually flipped 3 Grists into play. That's terrifying. Or 3 tokens into play. Put us to 6. Goblin Guide. Bolt. And I'm not sure what my opponent was trying to accomplish other than, I guess, committing Seppuku, so sort of. Or drawing to a card. I'm not sure what they could have been trying to draw there. Especially going to 1 life. They're not going to get a cord for Blood Artist or Prosperous Innkeeper. So, like I said, I'm not sure what they were trying to dig for there. Maybe they had Weather the Storm in their deck, but, you know, something to always pay attention to, especially on these playbacks. Sometimes you learn a little bit more about maybe what your opponent's digging for, etc. Kind of revising what I was saying. Apparently, when I was playing these matches, I just felt Eidolon wasn't good in the matchup. Although I do think on the play, you could leave some argument for leaving them in. No lander again. And it's pretty reasonable keep putting back probably the Fiery Islet. And one downside to this hand, obviously, if our opponent had turn 1 Mana Dork, which they don't really do anyway. Go ahead and attack in with Goblin Guide. They get a free block. We see Haywire Might. It's kind of whatever. They play Wool of Roots. They play Haywire Might. Attack us for 2. We go ahead and attack in here. See what they block. Not sure why they don't block with Haywire Might. Just seems like a free block. Grist. Hit us for 2. We go ahead and swing in. They block with the token. Suspend Riftbolt Pass, holding up Skullcrack and Lightning Helix. They get a String of Rootgeist. They sack that to kill our Goblin God. Once again, kind of leaving us in a weird situation where they, do whatever with Haywire Might. We Lightning Helix, gain some life. Suspend Riftbolt to the face. Go ahead and do that. Pass. Once again, holding up Skullcrack. Opponent hits us for 6. And then they choose to sacrifice that now to kill their own Undying or Wolf. We Skullcrack them. They gain no life, so they've had plenty of opportunities to sacrifice that at points. And then Searing Blaze for the win. So, a little bit of a miscalculation on our opponent's part. I think they had an opportunity to gain 2 life at some points. Maybe would have swung the game, especially as close as the final life total ended up being. A Grist ultimate next turn would have been lethal. So, or at least I think it would have been lethal. 5 or 6 creatures in the graveyard. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So yeah, we would have been dead next turn if our opponent had been a little bit better with when they sacrificed their thing, or if they would have thrown it away as a blocker earlier. Like I said, I'm not really sure what they were holding on to. Maybe they thought we'd board in Rolling Vortex, although I generally go out of my way to avoid bringing in Rolling Vortex against creature-heavy decks, unless there's like a huge life gain sub-theme, like something like Heliod Combo or Soul Sisters. But mistakes on both sides. Interesting to note, whenever you're doing these playbacks, sometimes you notice a little bit more than when you're playing them. So that's why I like to do the playback version of things sometimes, and live recording sometimes. Gets a little bit different perspective and forces me to go back and review the games as we're playing them. All right, back for match 2 on the play. Taking a look at this opening hand, pretty good balanced hand. We have Goblin Guide, Eidolon, a bunch of burn spells. Seems like a pretty reasonable keep. Fetch up Sacred Foundry because we need both colors. Attack, and our opponent shows Violent Outburst. So we're up against Living End. This is one of the matchups where Eidolon is pretty decent. They go ahead and do that main phase, which was interesting. We suspend Riftbolt, and our opponent concedes, realizing that they'd go to 6 with not a whole lot of power in play. They go to 3, and we have 3 burn spells in hand, so sometimes it's nice to win a quick game 1 against Living End before they bring in their Leyline of Sanctities and such. Alright, viewing our sideboarding, we board out our 4 copies of Searing Blaze for our copies of Inspiring Vantage. Looks like we also brought in Exquisite Firecraft, which makes sense, although there's not always a guarantee we'll be able to connect with burn spells because of Leyline of Sanctity, which our opponent is their number 1 thing. This hand does us a lot of damage between the Canopy lands and Rolling Vortex, but I still think this is the kind of hand you want in the matchup, so that goes turn 1 Misty Rainforest. We go turn 1 Goblin Guide. Attack, revealing Architects of Will. They fetch, cycle. Opponent cycles. Plays fetch land. We play Roiling Vortex. They fetch, do nothing. We show Steam Vents to them, so they're going to at least 13 there. They have the Foundation Breaker. Go ahead and do this. Do them a bunch of damage. We get to get in for 5 here, and then even with a Living End, they're just going to be dead in the water. So cast Living End, get a bunch of things, get the stacks at the top of our deck. But even if they have a copy of Force of Negation, they're just dead to the uncounterable spell. So sometimes it's easy to pick up a win. This is definitely one of the matchups where you would want Eidolon. This, Temur Rhinos, basically the Cascade decks, Glimpse combo, are certainly decks. Decks like Murktide, it's kind of a play-draw dependency. A lot of creature-based decks are play-draw dependency with that affinity. That Hammer Time is more like the old-school affinity lists, where they just empty a good portion of their hand sometimes on turn 1, turn 2. So Eidolon's even less likely on those games, but you know, there are some matchups like this where you definitely want Eidolon on both the play and the draw. So it is worth noting that Yawgmoth, kind of 50-50, play on the play you want it, on the draw you don't. Living in play and draw, you generally want that kind of card. Alright, taking a look at a quick deck tech and wrap up for a couple of matches we just played. Obviously, this list is very similar to what we played the last couple of weeks. Really some fine-tuning of the details, like one of Ragavan, which I'm fine with, over, say, a second copy of Skullcrack. The rest of the main deck is relatively the same. Still not a huge fan of the 5 Canopy lands, but it is understandable. I usually place a Kenzen in this slot if I'm doing my own, working on my own current version of Burn. But Eidolon, once again, we're testing it to see whether it deserves its place in the meta or not. A lot of people have chosen to do away with it, which is fine. You get a little bit more free flow with the deck, a little bit less worse top decks in the late game. Understandable. The upside of this is obviously against Cascade decks or things playing a bunch of cheap spells. It can be a reasonable card overall, but I can definitely understand why people have cut it from their deck. The sideboard, nothing too fancy with this version. This is a little more akin to what I would run. The difference being, obviously, Sanctifier and Beck, good against Scam, good against Breach, not really that relevant against a lot of the other rest of the format, other than maybe Dredge. A couple copies of Path, I'm always fine with those. Glad there's no D-Palms in this list. The only matchup you ever want really D-Palm against anymore, and you could bring it against Murktide and Shadow, but mainly it's for Hammer Time. Generally, they know how to play around it. Firecraft, all the blue decks running around, Creativity, Murktide, all the Cascade piles, the Omnath piles, etc. like to bring in, especially Flusterstorms and Spell Pierces, that kind of stuff. Nice way to force through that, the last bit of damage. Smashes, these cards generally work overtime in the matchups they're good. Hammer Time, Urza Saga decks, sometimes you might consider bringing them in against Amulet, although that's a little bit too reactive for my tastes. 4 Roiling Vortexes, very good against the Cascade decks, decent against decks with a little bit of life gain. That said, they do have the answers, Prismatic Ending, Leyline Binding, so it's not always a guarantee to stay in play. And then the Cascade decks generally bring in Force of Vigor or Foundation Breaker, as we saw the Living End deck. These last two things are kind of flex slots. I might opt for more copies of Sanctifier, more copies of Exquisite Firecraft, more copies of, say, Wear Tear. But whoever originally did this list, like 1 copy of Burst Lightning and Searing Blood, these are mainly for small creature-based decks, so you can deck with Ragavan, Yawgmoth, etc. So they do have their place. I know some people have been even experimenting with Play With Fire as kind of a way to go a little bit leaner with the burn decks. Honestly, we'd have to test that one out to see how I feel about it, although, tacking a Scry to a 2 damage to the face effect, okay, but still feels a little bit low below Modern's typical power level for burn. But I can understand if you're trying to maximize your early spell count, emptying your hand, etc., trying to deal the most damage, card makes some amount of sense. But it's kind of where we're going to leave off with this week's video. And we have a couple more matches in this league to go with Eidolon, and then we'll probably be back to working on Eidolon less burn in the following video, just to kind of get back to what more is the stock builds these days, and start tweaking that, try to get burned in a little bit better place going into Lord of the Rings coming out here soon. So if you like burn content, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe to MTG Nexus Red here. And if you like more modern content, check out our main channel, MTG Nexus, where we cover almost everything in the modern format. Currently working on some newer content, some suggestions from Reddit and such, what people are missing. But hope to see you for the next video.